Hello and welcome back, this is ProTailDev, back with another remaster video. This time what we're going to be working on is going in Blender, the program Blender, and we're going to be creating two new enemies for our Corrupting Spring game. First enemy is actually going to be a reoccurring enemy all the way through. It's actually a corrupted giant flower, which is basically going to be the boss at the very end of the game. The other enemy that we're creating is kind of similar to our normal corrupted spirits that we already have. It's going to look very similar. So this one's going to be ranged, so you're going to need to be able to stay on top of it, and it's going to actually just shoot you. It's not going to be going for the tree. And so the player's got to keep aware of the enemies that are going towards, as well as these guys which are trying to kill you. For now, this is just me making models in Blender. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so let's start off with making a cube. And what we're going to do is, I kind of want to make like I said, a giant flower is essentially what it's going to be, a corrupted flower. So I need to create a stem, and all I'm doing is just holding control and just extruding from the face all the way up. And we want to kind of have quite a lot of layers because I'm going to eventually have a rig going through all of the flower so that we can have it moving around and, you know, maybe even chasing the player. I think it'll look quite interesting, quite cool if we can animate some unique attacks where it's, you know, controlling and moving its head. So what I'm doing here is, again, making it look like an actual flower, just scaling it out and just making sure that it looks a little bit more circular. It's not too big of an issue because we will be using the sculpt tool to kind of round it all off a little bit more and, you know, make it a little bit more unique shape for the stem. But for now, I'll move on to the head. So I scale this out and then create like a little bit of a center point. Make sure there's no triangles, and then just filling in the face with a new face and then cutting it across. That way we can make sure that there's only 4 vertices. I'm pretty sure you can use 3 vertices, I just don't think it works very well. It doesn't deform very well, if I remember correctly, and it's just easier to work with 4 vertices for a face. So here what I'm doing is creating the main flower section, the petals, and this is what's going to be expanded out. Now you might be wondering why I don't have symmetry on, or, you know, mirror, and the reason is because I prefer when I create something like that's meant to be organic, an organic life form or an object, that I don't use symmetry because it makes it kind of look a little bit too symmetrical, and things aren't like that in real life. And so I want them to be a little bit different, a little bit off, and it may seem like something small, but people really do notice it when it's really the same, and it just looks strange. So here I am, I've created the petals and essentially where the attacks are going to come from, and just expanding things out and adding a little bit more detail to the actual model. I edit individual sections to make it, again, look a little bit different, but this is the centerpiece, so I'm trying to make it a little bit more like a flower as much as possible, and then I cut this up a little bit because I want this centerpiece to actually go down. I think is where it's like a hole. The very center is actually going to be a light, similar to how we've done our other enemy, where the corrupted spirit has like a light coming for its center, and that's how you can tell it's an enemy. I'll be having the same for the flower. Then what I do is I want to have petals that are on a lower level, specifically to wrap around on these edges, so if it closes, I want these to actually close with it, but they need to be separate in a way. And so that's what I'm doing. I make them different to the let's just call it the top petals, is because I want them to be more unique and to look different, and I always think that looks better. And so I'm just all I did there was just extrude them out and then kind of position it how I like and scale it. I do a little bit of expansion, and I did a lot of playing around that I've of course cut out so you don't have to put up with all these changes. There you go, at the center I've actually lowered it so it's more of a hole, and then I'm grabbing all these different vertices and kind of, I think I was flattening them and then also rising them a little bit. There you go, I'm bringing them out and trying to equalize them so that they're not too similar, but also making sure that they are still at the same level. I then expanded that middle vertices out to create more of a leaf style to it. I don't know what you call it. And then once I've done that, I actually raise each one to go up further. So I grab all of the different faces, and then I rise them, and then I keep going. I keep doing that all the way through until I get to the very point of the petals, the parts that go around it. I don't know what to call it. And then just keep rising those so it comes inwards and up, and then grab the very points of the actual bottom petals. So once that's done, I go to the very bottom of the flower and I make it more like I guess this is something that's not going to be seen, but I just want to make it, rather than it's just flat, I just want to put it down just in case it's in some positions it might be higher than the floor, so it's actually rooted still. And then I make the edges a little bit more bumpy, and this will help and make it much easier to sculpt a little bit later. It also makes it look a little bit nicer and allows me to run around it a little bit better. I want to smooth it out. I then add a bunch more, inserted a bunch of more lines or loops, or edges, whatever you want to call it. I think it's just edge loops. And then I smooth it out with the sculpting tool and bring it out. I add some extra bumps in there and increase some of the edges, bring it out, and then also smooth in some of the ridginess and the bumpiness of it. I also then fill in some of the flour to make sure that the model isn't going into itself, and makes it look a little bit more thicker as well. So this is something I really like the sculpting tool for. As you can see, there's some faces that are actually into itself, and what I was doing there was smoothing it out, making sure that it wasn't doing that. I then smooth out some of this flour, make it a bit more bumpy and much more natural rather than just too straight. And then what I do at the very bottom is I want to bring this out, because this is the part that's going to be touching the floor. And to make it look like it's actually going into the ground, I just bring it out a little bit like this, and then I add another loop into there, an edge loop, and bring that down a little bit so it slopes up a little bit better. Here I want to bring out the certain parts of the flower, because bear in mind this is also reminiscent of using the vine theme or the thorns that are on our vines, and I want to have that on the flower as well. It's like a staple of the corruption and the area in general, like an enchanted forest feel. And so what I'm doing here is adding spikes to it, and then I think in a minute, what I do now is I actually smooth off around the spikes and just around the edges. I do make the tool a little bit smaller and less strength, just around the edges of the spike. And then certain parts where I've gone a bit too far, but I want to keep everything, is I then zoom in on, say, this part, and then shrink and scale down the specific points so it's still got that spike. And oops, didn't mean to do that. And then what I do is smooth it off, like I said, smooth around all the different spikes once it's all done. And then anything that looks a little bit too plump, too big, I then smooth back down. So then I give it a quick name, and then I move on to our other enemy. So the next enemy we're going to work on is our ranged corrupted spirit. I'm just doing a bit of renaming here. I did rename on the last one, but just called it, I think, P or something. I'll go back into that when we go back to materials and rigging. I'll probably rename the giant flower a little bit more, but this I make sure to rename, and then I get rid of the arms that we have, and I want to replace them with individual separate arms. So by arms I meant horns, the vine horns that we have. I replace those with arms, and these vines are basically going to be holding these orbs, which are going to be shooting at you, kind of similar to the orbs you have. At least that's what I've decided at the moment. It could change, I could be shooting something else. But here I am just creating the first arm. I kind of skipped through it a little bit because I don't want to show all this again. You've seen me create these vines before on the previous time I created the corrupted spirit. And what I do is, just play around with it until we got a more vine-like arm. And then after I've kind of played around and figured out that I definitely want it as it is, I then duplicate it. So here I am positioning it, and then I'll duplicate it, rotate it round so that it's actually positioned correctly. So this is just again me playing around trying to make sure it's the correct position that I want. And there it is, the duplication. And then I'll make sure that it's the right rotation, the right amount. And then I kind of want it to be not touching, because I want the orb to be in the very middle of those two arms on the far left at the very point. There's a reason for that I'll be showing in a second. But yeah, I want the orb to appear there and to have a little bit of a glow. This is also so it doesn't clash with the light at the very center, which is the red light. So there we go. I also then duplicated on the other side, of course. Again, didn't do the mirror and the symmetry, because again, slight differences make it really matter for organic things. You don't want too much of the same thing. And then what I do here is add a torus or a donut shape, and this is actually going to go around the whole enemy. This is actually going to be spinning it as well. The reason why I have it as a separate object is because I want to animate it as actually spinning, as opposed to the arms, which are actually going to move up and down, which is why they're individual objects that are not connected to the actual enemy. And so what this means is that I basically play around with this ring. I do expand it a little bit, but I changed my mind later on because I don't like it as it is. So as you can see, it's like that, but I will change it because I don't think it looks good. I do have something a little better than that, which is just using a single vertices point to move up, which I've done now. And then skipping ahead, once these torus was actually in position, I then created a new one, and this one was going to be much smaller. This is where you could call it a focusing circle, a focusing section, but this is going to be behind where basically at the very center is where the orb is going to be, but at the point of the arms. And so it's going to look like it's going to be shooting from those circles, or being created at where those circles are. I wanted these circles to be these rings to be kind of connected to the wheel, because they're going to rotate with it. And then I position it, make sure it's correct. And I'm not sure if I'm going to animate the circles, but that's why they're separate objects, because I might animate them, might give them a separate glow and animate. I'm not too sure, but keeping them a separate object means that I can basically animate them freely. Then what I do is I duplicate the whole thing and have these rings even smaller, focusing even more, but still connected to the ring sort of. And again, separate objects so I can animate them. And this is kind of where the circles are going to go through. They're going to shoot from in that center point. And it looks like they're basically being created and controlled in those positions. When the ring's circling round, I'm hoping to be able to shoot every time it hits that middle section where the arms are. So the ring will circle round, hit, and it'll shoot. Now what I'm doing is I'm working on the face a little bit more, because I want it to still look a little bit different, and I want to add another eye. This eye will determine the enemy's speed, shooting speed, so it will be a different light coming from there. And let's say it's green, this means that it's maybe a slower enemy at shooting. We might have the same enemy but with a different light, maybe orange, and they're quicker at shooting. So the light will basically determine how quick they are. Here's me expanding it a bit, and then I'm getting ready to add in vines. So these two vines that are coming at the bottom will also have some at the top that look different. This is just kind of fill out the empty area of the circle. It wasn't necessary, I just thought I'd add it and make it more and more look like a vine. I do change them slightly, so they're not identical, they are slightly different, but I make them roughly the same at the same time, but slight changes every now and again, especially when I come to here, which is sculpting. So I sculpt them a little bit differently and then smooth out the rest of the model. I also fill out the model a little bit to places that seem a little bit low. Change around the strength and the area, but I also bring down the area so it can be more accurate. And once I was happy with those arms, I then wanted to create some kind of horns, or the same as what we had before, which is our vine horns. of course make them out, and I do a lot of playing around with the position, kind of what I want. I didn't know if I want them to go really far backwards like we've done with the tails, or if I wanted them to go up. Anyway, I skipped ahead a little bit here after playing around and really trying to position it. I ended up with something that I do like, and then again sculpt it a little bit, smooth some of the area out, and then do the same for the other side until I'm happy with it. I do add a little bit of smoothing around the model as well, but basically we end up with our next enemy. So I do a quick save here. I've renamed all of our individual parts, and the only thing we have to rename is our duplication sections, which is what I'm doing now. And this will help us a lot when we actually bring it into Unity. It's something I didn't do with our other enemy, was actually name it, so we've actually got a lot of the same parts. But there you go, there's our second enemy. So we have our flower and our main ranged enemy. And what we'll be working on next time is we'll be working on probably adding quick material to it. We'll also maybe put it in the shade, give it a shader, so we can see it a little bit better like we did with our trees, little poly trees. And we'll also give it rigs. So we'll actually give probably more the flower. I don't think I want the enemy with the ranged enemy to have a rig, because they're not necessarily going to be moving apart from the animations on individual parts. However, that specific plant will need to have a rig, because it needs to be able to move quite uniquely. Okay, so that'll do it. So that's our two enemies. I'll see you next time.